we see in various entities across the country. And the way that I basically split this down is I say that there's certain parts of the economy that are classic public goods, that are, you know, the types of things that only government will fund. You know, private sector is not going to fund an open use road because there's no financial return associated with it, even if there's an economic return associated with it. So because there's an economic return, government, and if that economic return is greater than the financial cost of investing in that road, then government should pursue that. However, private sector will not do that. There's other areas where private sector is substantially better placed to operate or to run or to invest in certain areas or sectors or whatever it is. And then there's the middle ground, where, you know, private sector can do it, but it's maybe not ideal for private sector. You need some government support, some government funding, some government guarantee, something like that. And I think those are the areas that we should be focusing on PPPs. I personally don't believe in the idea of PPPs for the likes of tourism. Let's just take the comparison, the Gondwana NWR comparison. Gondwana, I think about somewhere between 40 and 60 million profit a year, roughly. I'm sure there's somebody in the audience that can answer that. Roughly 1,500 employees, I believe, relatively new compared to NWR. Compare that to NWR, roughly 70 million a year loss. Around 900 employees, if my latest figures are correct. Much older, much more established, much better locations across the country. What's the difference? The difference is more operational than anything else, if you ask me. And I don't believe that the solution to the NWR issue, at least in the long run, is PPP. I think there may be a PPP transition. That means that government doesn't, you know, get paid bottom dollar, and basically as a result of that, that the citizens of the country don't get paid bottom dollar for that asset when it's privatized. But I don't think that PPPs are the solution in that regard. What's interesting in the economy, and particularly with regards to public finances at the moment, is that I think for the first time in a very long time, public finances have felt finite. You know, historically, we always had huge amounts of surplus debt capacity. We had a fast-growing economy. In many years, we had more money than we could spend. In 2012, we budgeted to spend far more money than we were actually able to spend in 2012, which, you know, seems like a very enjoyable scenario compared to what we have now. But we've never really had this feeling of finite funds. And with that feeling of finite funds, I think comes, or at least it occasions questions around capital allocation. So speaking of issues like inequality, we need to ask ourselves, is spending money on the likes of NWR the best way or the best use of those finite funds to address these core issues that we're trying to achieve or that we're trying to address? I hear a similar story often on the likes of Namibia. You know, I'm told we can't close down Namibia because there will be jobs lost. Well, just go and calculate the cost per job of the bailouts that we give Namibia every year. You could basically ask everybody in Namibia to go home, give them $2 million a year each, and you'd still be sitting with change. So is it the most efficient way of producing jobs? And we need to be asking ourselves these questions when it comes to capital allocation generally. If we look at the priorities that we have as a nation, are we using our capital as efficiently, our public capital as efficiently as we possibly can in order to achieve those objectives? And using that capital can take many forms, right? It can be just a guarantee. That can be a very efficient, it's an off-balance sheet item for government, but it can be a very efficient way of saying, you know, we want to move into this space, but the difference between what required for somebody to invest in there and the return that they'll kind of generate is relatively small, and we can de-risk it to the extent that just with a little bit of a guarantee, we will see other people's money achieving this development objective for us. And housing, I think, is a great example of that. But do we need to go fully fledged PPPs across the board? Certainly not. Are there areas where PPPs are suitable? Absolutely.
So I think just Roland on that one, that's why this is the best thing that could have happened to us. The crisis that we have now. Really, it's like a blessing in disguise. Because now, because we have realized that money does not grow on trees, we need to manage it better, and we need to allocate it more efficiently, and we need to work closer together. So hopefully we will all make the right decisions. Than when we know that we have got a lot of wealth. I do understand. I think what we need to understand again, especially just on tourism, for example, is what is government worried about? Government doesn't want to give away a tosha. So let's make peace with that. So government cannot give away a tosha. So with NWR, they will not give away the only thing you have is PPP because government must own land and somebody else must operate. So that is the things that we, and Sources Flay is the same, and many other great locations. So you will never convince them, and maybe you don't want to convince them. So just the government own a tosha. Can somebody who knows how to operate lodges and so on just do the operation, please, and you do something else? And that can apply to many, many things. From an accountability point of view, just maybe little point on something. So I'm involved a lot in public schools. So I made a choice to send my children to public schools. So they go to public schools, and then I kind of spend time on boards of public schools. So they are in Pioneers Park and Winduka School. Now you have got a teacher who doesn't do what? And do you know how long it takes to release a teacher to go home? Or a public employee? It's better to do other things than to deal with that. And I think that is accountability. So I think that's why I agree with Roland. Accountability is leadership, and it needs to start for people being held accountable for little things. Not just to kind of feel entitled, and I can come to school 20 days in a month because I can actually do 29, because if I don't do 30, then I keep my job. So there's a lot of things that we need to do there, and I think it starts with performance management in the public sector, which is talked about, and I think there's a session that is coming, but we need to fast track that. But let me not derail you, but I think accountability is a big topic that we probably need to have another session for.
We definitely need to have another session, because I heard somebody said GIF under their nose somewhere here, but we're not going to. We're throwing it back to the floor. We're going to give the gentleman over here. Did I see a hand that side? Oh. So we'll start with him. We'll give him a chance as well. And the good sir on that side as well. Can we also have a bit of gender parity? I see there's quite a good representation of women here, but not a lot of contributions. We've only had one. So can I please demand that a woman please ask a question or make a contribution? Thank you, sir.
So thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask a question on this platform. My name's Kevin, I'm a Namibian, and that's basically the summary. In trying to find the single question that will have the most impact, I realized that the situation is actually quite complex. And in trying to study the situation on my own, I also realized that we have made a lot of mistakes that have been documented, sometimes in books written in the 1930s, and we continue to discuss things and possibly are on the route to make some of these mistakes again ourselves. And as a result, my question is then, as the high-level economic panel, how much consulting are you doing with external economists, countries that might have experienced similar situations, especially in this very volatile economic situation? Because if you look at it, Namibia's growth contracted into negatives, yet we have economies out there who are also experiencing the same difficulties. But because of the way they are structured, they are still growing at 6%. They are complaining, but they're still growing because of the way their economies are structured, which tells a story about the volatility of the Namibian economy to external influences. So how much consultation are we doing with individuals, countries that have experienced the same thing that we have done, that we're experiencing now, and how much consulting are we doing in terms of trying to understand the geopolitical international influences on our own growth and outlook into the future? That's one side of the question that I had. And I also feel that we seem to be ignoring the elephant in the room. We have a lot of potential, and we refer to government as some static structure that has no capacity for change. If we look at possibly, let's say, Roland gave an example of Gondwana, NWR. Can we not just simply say NWR starts to manage, Gondwana starts to manage NWR, and we're done with the story? Instead of, you see? So it comes to say that, and if you look at countries that seem to have grown, they have sort of an authoritarian structure. If you look at China right now, it's authoritarian. Singapore, from the majority of its growth took place under authoritarian rule. If you look at Rwanda, that's growing at the moment as well, it's authoritarian rule, and they were just lucky enough that the dictators or the authorities that came on board were prospective and they did not have destructive ideologies, selfish only for personal benefit. Now, it actually seems to me that we have an authoritarian system locally that is preventing our progress, and it's the elephant in the room. We have great economists, great auditors. We have a lot of professionals and minds in the country, but we keep ignoring the elephant in the room because policy keeps limiting us from growth.
Kevin, you want to say politicians, or can you just say it?
I'll say policy.
Oh, it's okay, policies. Okay, that's it. But the clarity, just
So, and
look, cut that out.
The last thing then, if you have consulted, how realistic are some of these examples for us to implement? And if we are going to walk around these elephants in the room, what is our best chance to do so without collapsing in these very volatile circumstances?
Thanks. Thank you very much. Just pass it to Panashe quickly before you bring it to him. Just pass it because it's close by. You can just, Panashe, just keep it brief. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think he took some of the words right out of my mouth, especially around the eggshells that we sort of trend around. But on the regulation side of things, I mean, it's some of the issues are really simple. Construction Council is a perfect example. For 10 years, we've been fighting for it. It's literally the bill is ready, everything is ready to go, but you almost feel as if there's people that are benefiting from the lack of regulation that exists. Just coming to the PPPs, looking at the PPPs, there's a lot of potential that comes out of them. But if you look at the Ministry of Finance PPP department, I think it's no more than 20 people that sit there. And if the future of the economy is partly detected by that component, why is it taking so long to get off? I think it's the law was promulgated 2.5 years ago. To date, we don't have a single PPP through that law that's gone off. And I think that's where government should step in. They should step in and say, we give exemption for these 5 or 10 projects, similar to what Rwanda did, because that's exactly what they did. They identified 10 projects, those were prioritized, and those gave confidence in the law. So if we have a PPP system and we don't actually start it and it's all talk, it's never going to take off. Then the last one is exiting the markets. I think it's an issue that we talk about, but we don't actually do something about. You look at Namcor now, they're building service stations throughout the country. You look at RCC, the list goes on and on and on. We talk about it, but the action is an issue.
Phew. It is almost impossible to just grasp one issue to really zoom in because there's so many plethora of things we need to look at.
Yeah, but it fits quite well. My name is Harald Schütt. I'm the general manager for the Renewable Energy Industry Association and a fellow struggling entrepreneur. I would just like to take up some of the words that I've said before and then put them together. It was shift of the mindset of public sector, alternative ways of doing things, capital allocation, and lack of trust. That was some of the key words I wrote down. In the mid-90s, we realized we have a food problem. Actually, we were importing 97% of all fruit and veg. Only 3% was made ourselves here in Namibia. So what did we create? A centralized structure, AMTA. The rest is history. Centralized structure needs a CEO and a deputy CEO and a board and a Land Cruiser and another car and a bigger, so. Okay, then we realized we have an electricity problem. What do we have? A monopoly with round about 1,086 employees. Now, I'm producing on my roof for $1.20. I have to pay $1.46 if I buy from the municipality. I'm also allowed to feed back into the grid. I'm getting a credit of $1.26 for that. But I'm only allowed to feed back as many kilowatt hours as I consume. I invested $53,000 for 2.6 kilowatt of capacity. Why did I not invest 100,000 or 200,000 and supply my neighbors? We are talking about 2.6 billion every year that are taken out of all of your pockets, provided that you are members of those who pay for using electricity on the grid. And those 2.6 billion go to South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Why do we not take those 2.6 billion and put them in your and my pockets? We would be struggling a little bit less. So, lack of trust. If we have a problem in this country, we think we must establish a centralized organization who solves it. Most of them have failed. The next one that is on the list is NAMCOL. Because the the inner combustion engine actually should be in a museum when I was born, and that is more than half a century ago. The future of mobility is electromobility. And now is the question, how do we structure electromobility? Why not make it possible for everyone below 30? Who of you is below 30? Can I have a quickly sign of hand? Okay, that's many. You will own, if ever you will own a private car, you will own an electrical car. Because the times of a combustion engine is over. Now the big question is, how are we going to control your mobility? Are we going to monopolize it, or are we going to make it possible that you have your fuel station on the roof of your garage? There we're talking about 16 billion. Every year, Namibia is taking 16 billion out of the pockets of those who are moving themselves in combustion engines, buys US dollar, and for US dollar we buy petrol, and the petrol powers your cars. So shift of mindset, and trust in decentralized structures. How many decentralized markets could we have built for all the money that we pumped into AMTA? How much money could we have as disposable income if we would make electricity production a popular thing? And the biggest of all is mobility. How can we have that gift that we get every day channeled in such a way that it ends up in your pockets? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll get some feedback from the panel on some of the contributions. I'm seeing the time is about 7 minutes past 8 o'clock. We said we're going to have you here until 8. Can we take 10 more minutes just to wrap it up? Is that fine with everybody? Okay, so we're looking at exiting here around 8:20, 8:25 latest. Roland?
I'm not sure if I should go first. I think let me try and work through some of these. But okay, on Panashi's point, I mean, thanks. Nobody's ever told me I walk on eggshells before, so I appreciate that. When it comes to the point about authoritarian regimes, the only thing I'll say is be careful what you wish for. If you look at what happens when you lose accountability, it can go one of two ways, right? You can get a Lee Kuan Yew, but you can also get a Kim Jong-un. So, and once you've lost that accountability, that contract between the public and those in power, you have no way of protecting yourself if it starts going a North Korea way. So just be careful what you wish for there. I don't disagree that an authoritarian leader is necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think that you need to go as extreme and as authoritarian as you see in some of those countries in order to bring about good growth stories. I mean, we see it in Ethiopia now, for example. Deregulation, slow at first. We started to see more investment, and slowly, you start to see the economy picking up, and now it's one of the fastest growing economies on the continent. And you don't have hardline authoritarian leadership there. So it's not a prerequisite, let's put it that way. And it can go horribly wrong. The food thing is something that I struggle with. So if you look at one of our sort of objectives as a country is to be relatively food self-sufficient. If you ask me, this is incredibly inefficient. I mean, economists will tell you about the basic idea of specialization and trade. We do what we're good at, and we specialize in it, and we sell that product and purchase stuff from other people that they're good at producing. And the big challenge around Namibia when it comes to food security specifically is the issue of grain in Namibia. So grain is a critical portion of food security in most parts of the world. The problem with grain production is that if you live in an arid country like Namibia, the embedded value of the water in the grain is greater than the value of the grain. And so going down that avenue comes at a great cost. And I think that we see that in Namibia. It's very, very difficult to produce commercially viable, competitive grain relative to the open market cost of grain globally. The other thing is that there's a joke in farming, right? There's this joke, how do you make a small fortune out of farming? You start with a big fortune. And that's truer in Namibia than in many other parts of the world. Because we have this relatively arid environment, the net value added in most bulk agriculture is actually negative. So literally you put in more than you get out. And that's for most bulk agriculture. There's certainly areas where you can have specialty agriculture which can be enormously profitable, where basically your embedded value of water in that product is greater than, is less than the value that you can sell it for. The other thing about agriculture in Namibia that's a big challenge is that more often than not, when you look to make agriculture successful, you have to go to scale. And generally speaking, when you go to scale, what ends up happening is that you mechanize and you reduce labor. And we seem to view agriculture as a labor focused or sector rather than a capital focused sector. And the challenge around that is simply that we can probably have either a successful agriculture sector that is relatively profitable. That means that for the consumer, the best price is achieved, which is critically important on basic necessities like food, obviously. Or we can have a large employer in agriculture. But to get both is challenging. It's not impossible, but it's challenging. So I certainly am cautious when it comes to agriculture as a great success for the country. The final point that I just want to make is around energy. So, I mean, Harold and I have this endless debate about it. I believe that solar has potential, but I believe that that potential is massively overstated at the moment. And the reason that I say this is that the challenge that we face is, sure, the solar panels on your roof produce power, but they only do it 35 to 45% of the day. And the rest of the time you have to take power from NAM power. The implication of this is that during the day, there's an abundance of power. But in the evenings, when there's a shortage of power, you're taking power from NAM power. NAM power still has to maintain peaking capacity to ensure that they are able to meet those morning and evening peaks when your solar panels aren't working. It'll change with storage, yes, but it's not there yet. So NAM power has to maintain that peaking capacity. NAM power's fixed costs don't change, and the implication of this is that the operating leverage on NAM power means that for those people that don't have solar panels on their roof, NAM power probably has to push up prices. And the implication of that is that if you're wealthy and you can put solar panels on your roof, you can have cheap power. If you're not wealthy and you don't have solar panels on your roof, you are going to be paying more for power. So the solar panels on your roof may potentially be making somebody who can't afford to have those panels on their roof's power more expensive. So we need to just treat this, with a little bit of caution. If you get to a point where we have good storage, then that situation changes completely. So anytime.
They can organize an extra forum on that one.
3 points from my side, and I will just keep 3 so that I know that I remember all of them. So number 1, on the systems, whether they are economic systems or political system, and it starts with, sometimes we say capitalism has failed us, or we say socialism has failed us. And then we can say democracy has failed us, or whatever. So there is no perfect economic system, and there is no perfect political system. One day we'll probably have another system, which is more like theocracy maybe, and then that will be perfect. But for now, we will have to manage with a number of imperfect systems, and it all depends on how we make those systems work for us. So to be more mixed and to try and play the balance, I think that is what is very important. When you have got too much authoritarian, it can be good and it can be bad. I think I agree with Roland, be careful what you wish for, because sometimes you might think you're reaping the benefit, and then the cost becomes just too high. So many times we should also learn to appreciate what we have in Namibia. Many people do not have elsewhere in the world. So there's a lot that we do not have, but there's a lot that we have, and we should be grateful for that one, and probably do not wish for 100% of what other people have, because it might come with their problems, and we don't necessarily want that. The other thing that we need to realize is that our history is not necessarily the same history as everybody's history. So we do have a history to manage and a number of things to do. And I think with that, unfortunately, when you are young, you probably will not understand it 100%, but give us 10 more years, and then you will need to live the new life. And that takes me to my second point, which is 40. So one of my friends, Albi Bota, used to always tell me, Nangula, 40 years is the number. It takes 40 years to change a generation. The generation we have, so let's say, apologies if I am kind of touching anybody's head, but it goes to the Bible. So me being a Christian, and it took Israelis 40 years in the desert wandering and struggling with what to do for their mindset to change. So changing a mindset, I know that all of us want it to happen yesterday and just tell government, I like that idea. Why don't we just say, tomorrow, Gondwana, take over NWR? It sounds very easy, but yes, there's a lot to manage there, and sometimes you have to go through the process to understand where it all comes from. So we have got 11 more years left. And then the past is behind us. So what do we do in those 11 years? I think we have actually, I think our 40 years will be shortened. So I definitely think we have learned a lot more in the 29 years, and we probably starting to go, so that by year 40 we will be perfected. So we are on the road to that recovery. The last point I want to talk about is Namibian, by Namibian. And I'm coming to everything that we have talked about. Now we can say who must do what, and we challenge government to do what, and the business people to do what, and what have you. But I want to ask you, how many of you enter a shop and make a deliberate decision that I am looking for Namibian goods, and that is what I will buy, and unless the price difference is so huge that I cannot afford it. But if it is $1, maybe I can. Maybe a student cannot afford $1, but maybe the one that works on a little job you can. How many of us make that deliberate decision? And just know, first I feel Namibian, and then whatever is not left. So if you don't do that, please do not criticize anybody. Do that first, and then you can come back and start criticizing other people who are not doing other things. That is my closing remarks. Thank you.
Jason?
Just to wrap up,
I think before you wrap up, I don't know, the housing issue is, we brought it up, but we haven't really, can you just include it in your closing remarks, probably in passing?
I think obviously the housing issue has caused a lot of tension in the country, and especially amongst young people. It is the very thing that gives dignity on the one side to people, and I think I mentioned it before. Once you house someone, automatically you also increase the productivity levels of the country. There should be a concerted effort where we prioritize affordable housing and the entrance into housing. So the entire housing value chain within the country has got quite a number of weaker links. That is also similar to other African countries. I'm just saying that in summary, we need to look at how we can get access for young entrants, for people within the informal settlements into ownership of land, which is title and tenure, which seems to be quite a big problem, because where you don't have title and tenure, there'll be poor investment in the physical or permanent structure, which leads to shacks. But the moment you provide title and tenure, there's more security that the person could actually feel to invest for a more permanent structure within that space. So there's quite a lot of debates, and I think the housing issue is a debate on its own, and it requires time, but we need to think out the box. We need to think of new ways. We need to look at rent-to-buy models, perhaps, to get young people into the affordable housing space. We need to look at the impediments that are making housing unaffordable. We cannot just simply sit with a 20% overvaluation in terms of the property market in the country and sit idle around that. So housing a topic on its own. I think I will just end it off with saying that, I mean, looking at the crowd, I think someone raised a question saying how many people are under 30 here, and there are quite a lot of hands, and we're saying that the African continent has got the youngest population in the world, and that in itself gives a strong potential for a promising transition over the next generation, as Menangule has put it. So I think that we just need to harness that potential and that energy and match it with the experience, and I'm sure we can create magic.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Round of applause for our panelists, please.